Well, I have something in the queue, but I was at the drop-in session earlier, so I do want to hold back a bit and give Susan the opportunity uh, to go first, if you like, Susan. I really, thank you, feel like moved to continue with something we were talking about in the review session, which was um, it's like I'm not quite sure how to put it in words, but it's cultivating this listening for what comes up, and it came up in the context of a question about you know a thought, and it has all of these connecting thoughts, and we may find ourselves at a loss for which direction to go, and so often we're encouraged in the work to, and especially in the work 101, to be present with what is coming up. For example, if we are selecting on our Judge Your Neighbor worksheet, it's something that has like the most charge. I see that as one example of what's really real for me right now. And so my question is maybe less of a question and more of a, can we continue, exploring this? And I'm specifically interested in what practices I might bring to or alongside the work to help encourage this listening, like build this listening skill, because I don't consider myself to have it strongly, or at least to be aware that I have it strongly. Like it's developing. How can I cultivate that listening to what's really real?
Yeah, I think that's common for most of us. We're not used to listening, especially to ourselves. We listen to others a fair bit, but we also don't listen to them. But listening to ourselves sometimes is the hardest one to do, and that's what this work is asking. In a way, really, we're asking ourselves these questions, and we're waiting to find out what our answers are. And for that, we have to be listening. What are our answers? What is that? And sometimes it's hard to hear that because of that lack of skill of listening, right? So it's a great question. How do you strengthen that skill? The first answer I can find for myself is by practicing that skill, and doing the work is a way of practicing the skill. And what I find is over the years of doing it, my ability to listen to the subtler little things coming up inside of me has gotten stronger. So it grows with practice. This work is a meditation, and any form of meditation is going to bring that more lively in your life, more ability to hear yourself, more ability to be in touch with yourself, to listen to what's coming up, and the work is no exception. So that's probably the primary thing I would recommend. But why not? I do another meditation. I know a lot of other people do other forms of meditation, and it can be a really nice support just to have that other practice of quieting the mind and settling in and being more in touch with oneself. But I also think that we sometimes have a prejudice when we say listen to ourselves, that we think listening to ourselves means listening to some very faint thing that's like really this whisper of truth. And sometimes it is like that. But listening to ourselves can also mean, on the grossest level, listening to ourselves, like the screaming part of me. I don't have to get too subtle to be able to hear that. That is me in this moment. So when I write a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet, for example, when I identify a stressful situation and stressful thoughts, I'm already starting to listen to myself. So that in itself is a practice. Just writing a worksheet, just writing down the stressful thoughts is a way of listening to myself. And who cares if it's like down to the finest hair of listening, I'm listening to the part that I'm hearing. And that
Mm.
just doing that starts to create a kind of conversation with myself. Like I'm speaking, I'm being heard, there's a flow back and forth, there's respect. I'm not trying to push away what I'm feeling. I'm just expressing it. Like, oh, I hate this. I'm angry at this. I want this to change. Like, these are my actual thoughts. And until I can hear those, how the heck am I going to hear the more subtle ones anyway? So maybe that's the first starting point, is to see if I can really listen and hold myself when I'm in the stressed position and tantruming and feeling, anxious and angry. Yeah.
That's really interesting because as you're saying that, I'm realizing that the challenge is around here, ironically, hearing the parts that are the loudest, because through some form of conditioning, there are things that are acceptable and things that aren't, and so there's a filtering process, and the work is helping, at least for me, see those things which, like you said, are often front and center. It's just that it's not so much that the listening skill isn't there, but maybe more like the allowing or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
There's like
it's
a
okay for
blocking or something, right? I'm not allowed to see that.
like the judgments portion. Like, oh, there's a resistance here to writing. These judgments against a person for me, it was strongest there. Like
Yeah.
that really stood out to me. So
Yeah.
someone
Very
mentioned
common.
in this session, in the like, I shouldn't feel this. It's like another thought that comes up,
Yeah.
and then you're really at odds with yourself.
Exactly. So that's what happens to a lot of us. We're trained not to think negative thoughts. Don't say anything bad about anything. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. This is our training. This is what we grew up with, many of us, some of us even more so than others. And so there's this sensor built into our thinking that we've built over time. And so anything negative happens, we're like, oh, can't even hear that, barely admit that it's actually happening. It's over there. So then when you tell me to
Mm.
go listen to it, I'm like, listen to what? I've already pushed it away.
Hmm. That's
Yeah,
so what I'm talking about.
yeah, yeah. So this is a real practice for some of us to it's almost like coming out of denial, right? Because it means like I have stressful thoughts too. And so I might have different beliefs about what it means to have stressful thoughts. And so to admit that I have them is going to start to mess with my sense of who I am. Like I always thought I'm a really nice guy. And I still kind of think that, but I've kind of come out of that story a little bit too, because I start to see what actually happens in my mind. I can be vicious. I can be mean. I can be just just the opposite of what I was thinking I am. But I have to hold that really gently because otherwise I'll attack myself for being that way. So that's the
uh,
trick with the work is we're stepping a little bit out of denial, but not taking ourselves so fully out of it that crunch, we crush ourselves, crush our spirit in the process. No, this is just,
mm,
okay, how much can I handle? I can handle in this situation, I think he's a jerk or something. Okay. I can't believe I said that. Oh my God, like, but maybe I can handle it enough to write it down. And that's the beginning. And over time, as you keep doing the work, you may get more and more comfortable with letting it out. And that's what Byron Katie often says. People become pettier and pettier as they write their worksheets, the more they've been doing their work. Starts out like you're careful a little bit. And then as you start to trust the process and you realize nobody's going to get hurt, it's not saying anything really bad about me. We all have stressful thoughts. We all have this negative side. Like once you get comfortable with that, it starts pouring out. And once you realize
mm,
that every one of those thoughts is met with understanding. It's not going to be pushed back in my face. I'm not going to be punished for it. I'm not going to be made wrong. The work is a way of gently questioning and who's answering the questions? The very part that's angry, or the very part that's stuck, or the very part that's hurt. So there's no blaming and shaming going on. It's more like, have you looked? Can you see? Is there anything you're missing? And once the mind starts to trust, or the ego starts to trust that that's what's happening, that I'm not going to be put, I'm not going to be put my face in it, then I start to relax, and then I start to feel confident that I can bring more stuff out, and I can start to work it, and I'm going to continue to be held.
Mm,
And this trust begins to build. And this is what I've witnessed over years of doing the work. I really trust the work now because it's just myself. I trust myself to hold myself when I do the work. And so now I can bring more and more scary things out. But there's still probably room for more because I know there's still other scary things I haven't brought out yet, right? So that's just an ongoing process. And so the listening gets deeper, bigger, more comfortable over time. But I love that you went here, in terms of the loudest ones are the scariest. That can be just as much as the subtler ones. So listening is like expanding the range of our hearing from like, you know, more just like the spectrum, if you're going to see the range of vision on the electromagnetic spectrum, you can like see now into the X-ray and you can see into the radio frequency, right? Like expand on both sides.
mm.
So anyway, does that help in any way with that?
Very helpful. Yeah, I guess for myself, I can look forward to, because I'm realizing that trust, that's a key word that stood out, is like there's a trust building. There's parts, so to speak, that are reintegrating. I've heard that phrase a lot. So there's an integration, and you use the phrase ego or whatever we call this part that is all conditioned to withhold or engage in defense mechanisms, is like slowly learning that it, like we're creating this space for it to slowly unwind itself or reintegrate itself back in. So there's a long term thing, and that'll happen in its time,
Yeah.
right? Like that's just a process.
Like the ego is scared of being destroyed, right? When I ask questions like, is it true? When I ask questions like, who would you be without that thought? When I ask questions like, can you find a turnaround and reasons why the opposite of what you think is truer than what you actually think? Like the ego freaks out at first because it's like, I'm going to be destroyed. But what happens when it goes through this process a few times, it starts to realize that it gets freed, it gets expanded, it's like it's a beautiful experience. It's liberating,
Mm,
and it starts to trust that that's where the end process is. It's not like death or gore or destruction. It's you can look at that way, but what the actual experience is expansion and life and breathing deeper and all of that. So when that happens more and more, then you do start to trust more. Yeah. And then you do start to listen more. Because the only reason we didn't listen is because we're afraid that if we do, it could be dangerous. And so
hmm
once you realize it's not dangerous, you start being willing to listen more, and then you start to hear more, and it goes from there.
mm. Thank you for that. Very helpful.
Welcome. Yeah.
Helps me relax into the process too. Like I know that it's happening on a lot of levels. There's like immediate relief, maybe in the moment, and a bit of a taste at first of some freedom, some space, shall we say, around the thoughts. Oh, I'm disidentifying it. But longer term, there's like, oh, I can bring whatever to this. I can bring anything to this, and no expectations about what's. It's all accepted. It's all okay.
Yes. Exactly.